The king was the central figure for restoring the foundation of faith. He was responsible to carry out the word of God, which was given through the prophets. Before the king was anointed, the prophet and the high priest were to represent and teach the word of God, and thus they stood in the position of Abel. Their mission, as required by the providence of restoration, was to restore the physical world from the position of the archangel, representing the spirit world. However, after they laid the foundation upon which the king could stand, and anointed and blessed him as the king, they were to take the role of Cain before him. The king was to rule his kingdom, according to the guidance of the prophets, and the prophets were to obey the king as his subjects and counselors. About 800 years after Abraham's descendants entered Egypt, by God's command, the prophet Samuel anointed Saul as the first king of Israel. King Saul stood upon the foundation of the 400 years under the judges. Had he completed the 40 years of his reign in accordance with God's desires, he would have stood in the position of having restored through indemnity the 400 years of slavery in Egypt and Moses's 40 years in the Pharaoh's palace. Thereupon, King Saul would have fulfilled the dispensation of 40 for the separation of Satan, and laid the foundation of faith. If, upon this foundation, King Saul had built and exalted the temple, the image of the Messiah, he would have then stood in the position Moses should have occupied had he not failed in the first national course to restore Canaan, but had built the temple in Canaan and glorified it. If the Israelites had then stood upon this foundation of faith and faithfully followed King Saul as he honored the temple, they would have laid the foundation of substance. The foundation for the Messiah would have been established at that time. However, because King Saul disobeyed the commands of God given through the prophet Samuel, 8, he was in no position to build the temple. Upon his failure, King Saul found himself in the same position as Moses, after he had failed in the first national course to restore Canaan. As was the case with Moses, the providence of restoration through King Saul was extended. 40 years of King David's reign, and 40 years of King Solomon's reign, would pass before the foundation of faith was laid and the temple built. Furthermore, as we discussed earlier, King Saul was also in the position of Abraham, in the same manner that the will entrusted to Abraham was finally brought to pass through Isaac and Jacob. God's will to build the temple through King Saul had to be continued through the reign of King David, and was finally realized during the reign of King Solomon. Nevertheless, King Solomon left the position of Abel for the substantial offering, when he fell into lust with his many foreign wives, who turned him away from God. Hence, there was no way for Israel to establish the foundation of substance. The foundation for the Messiah, which should have been laid in the period of the United Kingdom, was not realized.